Hello and welcome to Money Trail with me, Amir Arafat. Today, money and U.S. elections.
A lot of money.
Hundreds of millions of dollars.
Obscene amounts of money are going to be spent.
Oh, geez. I mean, they're saying it's going to be the most expensive election in human history.
Too many billions.
Probably $1 billion.
I heard something about a couple $1 billion.
Well, there's about $6 billion are going to be spent this year on the presidential elections. President Obama has already raised $166 million. Mitt Romney, the Republican candidate, has raised $96 million. And most of the money is coming from the big banks, the companies like Microsoft, Google, Goldman Sachs, and believe it or not, the companies that are contributing to Obama are also contributing to Mitt Romney.
Big money has long dominated our elections, and the problem only got worse back in 2010 after the Supreme Court Citizens United ruling, which paved the way for corporations to spend unlimited amounts of money in our elections, adding to the enormous influence they already have within the political process.
2010 also changed some of the rules for how campaigns can be financed in the U.S., allowing for corporations and unions and other kinds of organizations to directly participate by spending their own money on advertising, on other kinds of messages, ways to try to communicate with voters to persuade them to vote for or against particular candidates. Before 2010, spending by corporations or unions directly on those kinds of activities was prohibited. But the Supreme Court ruled that that was unconstitutional, that kind of speech, that kind of spending had to be permitted. And so it is now. And so we'll see another increase. This is, again, a very competitive election, and especially at the presidential level, but also for the Congress again. And so, yes, there will be lots of spending. We think at least $6 billion this year, and we'll see what happens.
The problem with money in politics is not so much the amount that is spent on campaigns, as it is who pays for them, what they get in return, and how that affects public policy and spending priorities.
Much of that money is going to be coming from a very small number of people and special interests. And that's not the way our politics ought to be.
It destroys our democracy. It subverts the will of the people. Our voices cannot be heard.
That's really disturbing. We need to get money out of politics, and this is not a step in the right direction.
When you see this spending and how it is blowing up our democracy, it really needs to be addressed.
If you got the money, we can play by this game here. If you don't have the money, you're on the outside.
It definitely hurts democracy because the voice of a few corporations or a few wealthy individuals will drown out the voices of the many.
It is not the Republicans and Democrats who are actually competing for the White House or the House on the Hill. It's the people versus the corporate world. According to the Center for Responsive Politics, individual donors represent a tiny slice of America. In 2008, the number of itemized individuals represented less than 0.5% of all adult Americans. Analysts have estimated that historically, no more than 4% of Americans make a contribution of any size to federal politics.
It is time for us to be heard because we're the ones who bear the brunt of what goes on, and we're carrying the burden of a lot of gambling with the money, and then they want us to also carry the burden of all their failures, and that is not fair.
Executive Director of Center for Responsive Politics, Sheila Krumholz, says, participation in this element of our democracy is not representative of the electorate or the nation as a whole. The typical campaign contributor showing up in government data is still typically a lawyer, a Wall Street banker, a doctor, a CEO, or a college professor at a major university.
The amount of money in politics really destroys any semblance of democracy. Democracy is, of course, ruled by the people, but it's not the people who have the final say in the electoral process. It's the special interest.
Once again, go to opensecrets.org and their log of interest groups and the money they're pouring into U.S. elections. Finance, insurance, and real estate tops the chart, followed by other groups such as lawyers, miscellaneous business, health, and communications, electronics, energy and natural resources, construction, labor, agribusiness, transportation, and of course, the almighty defense industry.
Special interests are people who are corrupting the political process by having an agenda that doesn't actually benefit ordinary people.
If someone wants to get a contract or to get legislation passed, then they need to donate to a specific legislator.
The people who make contributions have special influence over the people that they contribute to.
If I have enough money, I can get in the game and influence and lobby and get my wishes reflected and not anyone else's.
Yeah, well, what third parties in America, which are the large corporations, you're talking about Microsoft, Google, Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, all the monstrous billionaire corporations have a tremendous influence in the elections in the United States because they fund both candidates running for president. They also fund many of the people running for the Senate and the House of Representatives.
The 2008 election for president and Congress was the most expensive in history. The Nonpartisan Center for Responsive Politics estimated that more than $5.3 billion went toward financing the federal contest. The presidential race alone cost nearly $2.5 billion. The overall cost of the 2008 election showed a 27% increase over the 2004 cycle. We now know that the Democrats won thanks to their deeper pockets. The Democrats collected 52% of the money for their congressional and presidential efforts by the end of the election cycle.
Candidates cannot run for office in America unless they have millions upon millions of dollars. In fact, 93% of the candidates who won congressional seats in America in 2008 could outspend their opponents. And how most Americans vote in America is through television commercials, which cost millions upon millions of dollars.
How about the House on the Hill? 2012 congressional elections also around the corner. If history is any guide, most congressional incumbents return to Washington. In the last 6 elections since 1998 contests, an average of 97% of House incumbents have won re-election, as have 86% of senators. Based on data available from the FEC, all candidates for House and Senate raised more than $1.5 billion. Incumbents running for re-election continue to have a huge advantage. The average Senate incumbent raised $8.3 million, which includes the money raised since the start of the 6-year term back in 2003.
They're putting people in place who don't care about the common man. We have legislators who have literally sat in office in the Congress for a year or two and have collected a paycheck and done nothing. If we did that at work, we would have to go and we would be fired. But they get to collect their paychecks. They should give up their paychecks and give it back.
And how much is the price of a single seat in the House or Senate? For candidates looking to claim an open Senate seat, the average is about $1.6 million and varies wildly depending on the state's size and advertising costs. The incumbent's advantage in the House is also lopsided. Members of the House raised approximately $1.2 million through the third quarter of 2008 on average, while their opponents had raised an average of $286,000, a 4-to-1 edge for the seat holder. Open seat candidates collected about $497,000.
There is a risk that so much money with so narrow interests involved can reduce the kinds of choices voters have, can shape the range of candidates and platforms, messages that get conveyed in ways that diminish the democracy, that make it more difficult for outside voices to be heard. And that's something to be concerned about. It's something that we watch for closely.
The money paying for the election, the home stretch advertising, voter mobilization, and other campaigning came largely from the same industries and interests that have funded past elections. Business interests accounted for about 72% of all contributions, with ideological labor and other interests making up the rest. Democrats were favored by lawyers and Wall Street. Some of the other top givers, retirees, real estate and doctors, and other health professionals, were mostly split between the two major parties. Democrats have solid support in a number of traditionally supported industries, of course, including the entertainment industry. But Republicans count on contributions from the oil and gas, pharmaceutical, and manufacturing industries. Viewed more broadly, the finance, insurance, and real estate sector once again dominated in political contributions, exceeding some $373 million. Democrats had a slight edge with the finance sector.
The corporations are spending the money that belongs to their shareholders and their workers, and they're spending that money in a way that the bosses feel appropriate, not the people whose money that actually belongs to.
What we need is campaign finance reform that is meaningful and touches everyone. We can't allow money like that to be spent by individuals.
Both parties, too, that they're both feeding from the same trough of corporate cash, and that undermines the will of the people.
The people who donate the money donate it to both parties so they have influence on the policies of both parties.
What we have is the corporations are going to win no matter what. Whoever is elected, they're going to have influence in the White House.
The top donors, based on contributions from their political action committees and employees, were dominated by companies in the financial sector, and most of them favored Democrats. After Act Blue, the online organization that directs individual contributions to progressive candidates, the top corporation in 2008 was once again the too big to fail Goldman Sachs. The global investment bank's employees in PAC contributed at least $5 million to the 2008 campaign. Citigroup was next at $4.2 million, followed by JP Morgan at $4.1 million. As ordinary Americans were grappling with the fangs of a recession that had cost them their jobs and homes, the root causes of the recession, namely Wall Street and other industries in the financial sector, were busy doling out millions of dollars to buy a president who later reciprocated with billions in taxpayers' money, marking the biggest bailout program of history.
When Obama got elected president, we were in an economic crisis. And what he did is he bailed out the banks in hopes that the banks would lend the money to individuals to break us out of recession. Well, in point of fact, the banks did not. The banks took the money, used it to buy back their own interest, increased their ownership value of their present owners, and the working person got little or no help from the government. So now Wall Street was the one that put up most of the money for Obama to get elected. So what was his response as a Democrat? Was to go to Wall Street and bail out the banks.
In addition to campaign contributions to elected officials and candidates, companies, labor unions, and other organizations spent billions of dollars each year to lobby Congress and federal agencies. Some special interests retain lobbying firms, many of them located along Washington's legendary K Street. Others have lobbyists working in-house. So where is this K Street? Who's in there? What is it they do?
K Street is a place where a lot of the lobbyists who are paid by these special interests have their offices. It's a street in Washington, and it happens to be a street. You know, it used to say Madison Avenue was the center of the advertising industry. K Street's the center of the government lobbying industry.
People should know that there's probably hundreds of lobbyists for corporations for every elected official that we have in Congress.
When you go online, you can see how much a special interest is given to your representative. But that's only part of the story. Sometimes, special interests have connections to other big donors who can help them push their message. They're called lobbyists. For example, the Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America, or PhRMA, one of the biggest players in the healthcare debate. PhRMA's PAC gave $5,500 to Senator Max Baucus, chair of the Finance Committee that's been working on a huge health insurance reform bill. PhRMA is represented by 37 lobbyists who collectively have contributed almost $84,000 to Baucus' campaign committees. But it doesn't stop there. 10 other major health and insurance firms had 10 or more outside lobbyists who also gave big to Baucus. That's 109 lobbyists. If we add up all their contributions, all 11 organizations and their lobbyists, that brings us up to more than $450,000. How much money is that? Well, put it this way. These 11 firms and their lobbyists combined to contribute almost 1/5 of Baucus' total current cash on hand. How would you treat someone who represented over 1/5 of your current bank account?
It works very straightforward. A person comes to my fundraisers, puts in money. After I get elected, he comes to visit me and tells me about the problems that he has. I'm very responsive to him because I know he's contributed to my campaign.
There are an average of 25 corporate lobbyists per congressman in the Senate and our House of Representatives, and even more lobbyists are aimed at the President of the United States. So they have parties for them, they give them perks, they fly in to play golf, so and then they're pitching their products. For example, drones are going to be flying over the United States pretty soon. There is a drone caucus in our U.S. Senate where the big companies like Boeing are giving money to certain congressmen, certain senators to be sure that they're going to be able to get money from the drones flying over America. And President Obama has signed legislation allowing it.
And now the proverbial revolving door, the shortest cut ever between the corporate world and the political world in Washington, D.C. Although the influence powerhouses that line Washington's K Street are just a few miles from the U.S. Capitol building, the most direct path between the two does not necessarily involve public transportation. Instead, as through a door, a revolving door that shuffles former federal employees into jobs as lobbyists, consultants, and strategists, just as a door pulls former hired guns into government careers. While officials in the executive branch, Congress, and senior congressional staffers spin in and out of the private and public sectors, so too does privilege, power, access, and of course, money.
The revolving door has the effect of influencing how people act when they're supposed to respond to the needs of constituents, but they're not. They're responding to the needs of perhaps their next employer.
People go out and they work for government, and then they go work for the people they were supposedly regulating.
If you think that you're going to leave for a job in the defense industry, how are you going to vote on defense appropriations?
There are 6,176 congressional staffers in the Open Secrets revolving door. Each election, members of Congress are defeated in their bid for re-election or choose to voluntarily leave office. The 2010 midterm election saw an exceptionally large number of sitting members leave. Where are they now? Will they parlay their influence into lucrative lobbying jobs or choose to continue public service or try something entirely new? Out of 120 members, some 78 have found new employment as lobbyists and board members of big firms and corporations.
Well, all politicians have a revolving door, and the revolving door is it's the corporate lobbyists going in and out of the White House or in and out of the offices of our congressmen. And I've actually seen articles in this country where someone is elected to, like, our House of Representatives, and they have a welcoming party in Washington, D.C. There may be 100 guests in the room, and one congressman actually said it surprised him. There were 80 of the 100 guests, there were 80 lobbyists in the room. So there's a lot of money to be made off of lobbying, pursuing our congressmen, getting to pass legislation that favors them financially.
And then there's ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, or American legislators exemplifying corruption. Why corruption? The American Legislative Exchange Council, also known as ALEC, counts among its members some 2,000 state legislators and corporate executives. They sit side by side and collaborate to draft model bills that reach into areas of American life, ranging from voting rights to environmental protection. Then they work in concert to get those bills passed in state houses across the country. For example, legislators in at least 7 states in 2010 drew on a proposal drafted by ALEC to advance legislation withdrawing their states from regional agreements aimed at fighting global warming.
The American Legislative Exchange Council is a very large group. It has about 2,000 members around the country in state legislatures and our U.S. Congress. Well, John Boehner, who is the House Speaker, is actually a member of ALEC, what's called ALEC. What they do is they write legislation, and they're very, very influential.
ALEC is a mechanism. It's a powerful organization based off an idea, and the idea is pretty simple. ALEC connects corporate lobbyists with state legislators and helps to push corporate-written legislation into the states, all 50 of them. The process works like this. ALEC holds a policy conference at a last resort at, say, the Ritz-Carlton on an island off the coast of Florida. There, corporate lobbyists and ALEC-sponsored state legislators gather behind closed doors to assemble in task forces and vote on and adopt, quote-unquote, model legislation. Now, most of these bills are written by corporate lawyers themselves. Furthermore, corporate representatives have an equal vote with state legislators on whether or not the bills pass in the task force meetings. Think about that for a second. So once adopted as model legislation, a bill goes into the ALEC policy manual and is then pushed out by the organization to its members in every legislature across the country. That's why certain laws, like ALEC's Stand Your Ground bill, spread like wildfire across the states in such a short period of time. It's coordinated, and it's not a coincidence.
So this group writes a lot of legislation. Legislators pay a fee to join it, and they get model legislation written for them. In other words, it's not our congressmen writing legislation or their assistants, it's corporations, and that's what the American Legislative Exchange Council does.
ALEC is also a key player in a national drive to toughen voter ID laws, successful so far in 18 states. And in the wake of a series of Supreme Court decisions lowering barriers to corporate political spending, ALEC has encouraged states to reject bills that would require companies to get shareholder approval for their political contributions. In the past decade, ALEC corporate leaders have invested more than $370 million in state elections. Their money and additional millions from other ALEC-aligned businesses has financed campaigns for and against state ballot issues and helped elect thousands of state senators and representatives willing to champion ALEC bills at state capitals.
In Florida passed a law, the state of Florida, limiting how much corporations could be taxed. That legislation was drafted by the American Legislative Exchange Council, and it would so influence the Florida legislature, they even put the mission statement of ALEC in the particular legislation.
The money also has reinforced ALEC's issue agendas spelled out in the group's model bills. Among other things, ALEC supports public subsidies for private schools, the development of privately owned prisons, restrictions on the voting rights of thousands of college students and senior citizens, and unlimited secret corporate spending on behalf of political candidates and parties. ALEC is a force by the organization's own account. About 180 of its model bills are enacted in at least one state every year. ALEC scored some of its highest profile victories during 2011 in Wisconsin and Ohio, where newly elected Republican governors and legislators attacked budget shortfalls with legislation that sharply restricts the bargaining power of public worker unions. The bills were passed just a few months after companies in ALEC's leadership put more than $304,000 into the campaigns of Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker and Wisconsin state legislators. While an estimated 2,000 state legislators currently are members of ALEC, they pay only $50 each, a total of $100,000 toward the organization's annual budget, now about $7 million. The rest comes from the company's foundations and about 300 other businesses affiliated with ALEC.
Some examples of legislation that this particular organization, ALEC, has proposed and pushed, especially at the state and local level throughout the country, has been more controversial perhaps than some of their supporters were aware of or were interested really in supporting.
Remember the man who some 4 years ago, only 4 years ago, promised to fight the Wall Street in Washington, D.C.?
President Obama lied even during the campaign. He was saying he was not taking money from lobbyists. I knew some of the individuals that were contributing to him, so he was taking money. But it's not unusual for a politician to look you straight in the eyes and lie. But with respect to Obama, he has been controlled by Wall Street. He's been controlled by the military-industrial complex, and you're not going to see an appreciable change in policy. The Republicans, in order to outdo Obama, get more ridiculous and take on positions that are absolutely horrible.
Well, President Obama doesn't have really any power. The President of the United States does not have as much power as people think. As I've often argued in a number of the pieces I've written for Huffington Post and our website at rutherford.org, who really runs the government of the United States are corporations and their lobbying influence. So the president is not going to have that much power. You need so much money in this country. Like there's $6 billion are going to be spent by both candidates running for president this time, Mitt Romney and President Obama. They have to have money. If you don't have the money, you can't be president of the United States. And who provides the money are big groups like Microsoft, Goldman Sachs, all the large corporations. That's where they get their money. So they have to listen to the corporations.
Well, thank you for watching. Always follow the money trail with me, Amir Arafat.